Today we welcome Mr. Jim Stoker, who serves as the president of the Firearm Owners Against Crime Institute for Legal, Legislative, and Educational Action. He served 6 years in nuclear weapons security in the Air Force, has 29 years of law enforcement experience, is a federal license holder, a constitutionalist, and an FOAC member for over 10 years, including 4 years on the board before taking over the presidency position from his mentor, the well-respected Jim Stoker. Welcome to the show, Mr. Stoker.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
We certainly are living in difficult times where our constitutional right to bear arms seems to be more under attack than ever. Tell us about the two recent bills that were passed in the House.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had two House bills that made it through. One regarding universal background checks, which is basically requiring, a background check on any weapon sale in the Commonwealth. We don't just say firearms because under Pennsylvania law, your AR-15s, typical shotguns, long guns are not considered firearms under law here, but requires universal background checks for most gun sales. And the second would be what we would call commonly known as red flag laws. In Pennsylvania, they're calling them extreme risk protection orders. So both those bills made it through for the first time in decades through committee, and then were actually voted in the affirmative on the House floor, which the universal background checks we kind of expected might get some traction there, even though we knew it would not proceed beyond the House. But red flag laws, I got to admit, that kind of shocked me that so many legislators would be so willing to just throw away due process and your constitutional rights.
So what does that mean for your average legal gun carrier or, supporter of the Second Amendment in Pennsylvania? Because I know in Connecticut, there's talk that they use those lists now against the people, which was a sign that, hey, our gut instinct was telling us, why are you taking all this information and we're on the list? What are you doing with that list? I mean, do we have to worry like that now?
Not yet. It appears to be dead in the Senate. I've had some conversations with Senate leadership. As an organization, we don't align Democrat or Republican. We align pro-gun or anti-gun. And, it's a Second Amendment issue for us. You're either for the Second Amendment or you're the enemy, one way or the other. And those that are for the Second Amendment in Harrisburg, which does include a couple Democrats, plus the leadership that we've talked to on the Republican side, they say these bills are dead, and for good reason. I mean, anybody that wanted to call in and discuss the issue, talking about the pros and cons, the red flag issue is completely a violation of due process. I can't believe that this has actually been allowed to stand in other states. It's a clear-cut violation of the U.S. Constitution. Now, there are some state constitutions that don't include a Second Amendment portion. Like here in Pennsylvania, we have Article 1, Section 21, which guarantees that the right to bear arms in defense of oneself or the state shall not be questioned. It's even stronger than the Second Amendment language. And that benefits us here. But, that this has been allowed to stand anywhere is kind of ridiculous. And I keep waiting for the Supreme Court to weigh in and say, hey, this is a due process violation. And it not only violates, the Second Amendment, but violates the Sixth Amendment. Some could argue the 14th Amendment. I mean, there's other issues there, that should deem those red flag bills to be unconstitutional. So I don't think we have to worry about that yet. Where my concern is that we're not getting a pro-Second Amendment vote at the polls right now. There's a lot of moderate voters in Pennsylvania that, quite frankly, even you go up to some of these groups like Everytown USA or Ceasefire, the anti-gun agenda, so to speak, they're just not well educated on the topic. It's a lot of folks that are buying into an agenda speech, and they're coming out and saying, all these bad things about firearms, they really don't understand them. And so until you're able to discuss the constitutionality of these issues, the impact it's going to have on law-abiding citizens, a lot of those folks that when they hear the way these laws actually affect folks, they change their opinion of them and they actually are against them. But right now, we're okay because the Senate's not going to permit it. But come election time, if people don't start changing the way we're voting at the polls, then in the near future, we could very well be in danger of becoming another Massachusetts or California.
Well, you said something that's really important. Of course, we don't want to be political, but we see who votes for and against. And I did look up on the PA.gov website to see what the chances are. They give you a percentage of a bill passing, once it goes through one of the chambers. And there is only a 2% chance of these bills passing in the Senate, which means, hey, you're right. We're probably pretty good. But we have to do a lot more with education and a lot more of getting people to understand what's going on. And I don't know what that's going to look like. But the good news is that there were 2 bills that weren't passed in the House, all right, but they're still pending. So tell us a little bit more about those bills and what we should be expecting.
Yeah, the big thing with those, there's a mandated reporting for lost and stolen firearms, and there's also a mandatory storage law. So, as an organization, we write white papers. We issue these position papers on these bills to try to educate folks. And we actually send them out to every representative and every senator. As long as we have their email address correct off the state site, then they get a copy of it. Now, whether they read it or not, I don't know. Whether it affects their voting, I don't know. I hate to say it, but the anti-Second Amendment movement seems to vote lockstep. They don't really care about constitutional issues. They don't seem to vote independently. It's almost like leadership says, hey, you're going to vote for this or else. And we've seen that through the years, at different levels of politics. Funding gets denied, staffers get pulled. There's punishment for not going along with the party agenda. So some of these bills, lost and stolen firearms is just a way to incriminate the law-abiding citizen in Pennsylvania. And when people say, well, how can you say that? It's common sense. People should have to report a stolen firearm. I mean, honestly, the law-abiding citizen almost always does. Very few instances where they don't, but you have to consider where they may not. Perhaps you have a law-abiding citizen that has a family member that's a criminal element, perhaps a violent criminal element, and that family member comes to them and says, hey, I'm taking your gun, and if you report it, I'm going to use it against you. Things of that nature. There's a physical threat against the law-abiding citizen where there's actually more risk within the idea of reporting it than anything that law enforcement's going to hand out. So there might be a personal risk, a family issue, something they feel law enforcement can't protect them from that would prevent them from reporting. But otherwise, for the most part, your law-abiding citizen is going to report a lost or stolen firearm, primarily because they want the value of the gun back. They're going to claim it on their homeowner's insurance or whatever the case may be. Maybe they know who stole it. Maybe they don't. Firearms owners get victimized through the years out of their own vaults. Maybe a family member that falls on the wayside or becomes drug addicted or something along that line, victimize them. And they don't really know when it was stolen sometimes. So, the laws have been written in the past that mandate you report this firearm as stolen. And it said you had 72 hours to report it or things of that nature. The problem with it was, how do you report something within 72 hours if you don't know what happened? So that's become an argument. You would be criminalizing the law-abiding because they didn't know when they were victimized by a crime. So the anti-Second Amendment crowd grabbed hold of that and said, okay, well, let's say upon discovery. The minute you discover that it's been stolen, you have to report it. You have 72 hours from that point or something along that line. Now, the problem with that is, if I'm that straw guy, if I'm the guy that's out there buying firearms and then reporting them stolen so I can hand them off to my local drug dealers for a profit, you're relying on me to tell you when I discovered it was stolen. So, the police come to me and say, hey, we have this firearm. The serial number comes back to you. When did it go stolen? You say, oh, it was stolen? I just act like I don't know. No, there's no violation nonetheless. Or you come to me and say, I come to you as a law enforcement officer and I say, hey, my revolver was stolen. And you say, when did you discover it? Well, just this morning. Well, you don't know any different. If I'm the bad guy, I'm lying anyway. I mean, I think we've proven that they're not the most upstanding citizens. I don't think we can trust them to be honest with us. So you're not going to really have that kind of an impact on the person that is of a criminal mind. It's the law-abiding citizen that comes in. Well, it was stolen 2 weeks ago, but I was checking my cabin, I was checking the camp, I was checking my truck, or I thought maybe I left it in a locker at the range, or whatever the case may be. They're the ones that are going to get penalized. And there's actually a constitutional law in this. Haynes case, it was a Supreme Court case that determined that a prohibited person, say I'm someone who's not permitted to own a firearm, can't be held accountable for not reporting it, because it would be self-incriminating for me to come to you as a law enforcement officer and say, hey, I had a firearm and it was stolen. Well, my own Fifth Amendment right prevents me from self-incrimination. So you couldn't hold it against me if I'm a prohibited person. So what are we really trying to do with a lost and stolen bill? Is it making the street any safer? Absolutely not. Is it going to help law enforcement crack down on straw sales and purchases? Absolutely not. The only end result is going to be criminal charges against a law-abiding citizen who was trying to do the right thing, perhaps didn't understand the law.
Well, I'll give you for an example. Okay. Recently I went to some mall, big parking lots, right? So I carry legally, I'm legal, but I locked it up. Okay. Cause I just said, I'm just going to lock it up. And I go shopping with my kids, come out, and I can't find my truck. I almost went into heat stroke panic attack. Okay. Because all I could think about was not my truck, which I love, but what was in it. And what would that mean if someone right now had control of that arm, that pistol, okay? And God knows if it was going over the border, was it committing crimes? Was it hurting someone? Because it was out of the hands of the legal owner. Now, fortunately, the parking lot was on the other side of the building and everything was in order. But this is the kind of emotions that a law-abiding citizen shouldn't have to worry about when they're following and towing the line. Like when you travel, you know what you have to do, right? I mean, sometimes you don't even have a choice. You got to go around a state sometimes if I mean, this is just awful. And, I have a lot of friends in other countries, patriots, like in Australia. Okay. And they tell me all the time, I'm like, you guys are such tough people. How did you let this happen to your country? And they all say the same thing. Because you guys are the only country that has a Second Amendment in your Constitution.
Absolutely.
And this is why people need to remember that, and our courts need to remember that, because they cannot continue to shred away our constitutional rights. It has to end somewhere. And, the other thing is this. There's just so many out there. I did another interview with a gentleman who was in the industry. He's like, do you know how many firearms are out there legally? How would you, I just don't understand. So I think it's two things. Number one, that part of the anti-gun movement, they really just don't like guns. Okay. They think that they kill. Meanwhile, it's the person who kills. You look at England, they took away the guns. You know how murders are being occurred? With rocks over the head, with knives. I mean, the most disgusting, heinous ways. If you're going to murder, you're going to murder. Okay. And the other thing is, I think they really want to turn off average people like me. Like you, to say, do I need this headache of, making this commitment and they're coming after me and I'm on the list and, where that's going to go. So, we just have to know our rights. Am I correct, Jim?
Yes,
we need to know our rights and we need to, be smart about them. But let me ask you this question, because it's hard to determine. I know we don't have a crystal ball. Okay. But what do you think that law-abiding citizens can expect from future legislation? Where does it end?
Well, that's a good question. It all comes down to, like you said, education. So you touched on a few important parts, right? You talked about when you thought your truck was gone, the concern was, where was the firearm? Why? Because you're a law-abiding person who actually cares what the repercussions of your actions are. Consequences matter to you. Whether it's legal or not is irrelevant. It's the thought that, wow, that firearm could now be in the hands of somebody who shouldn't have it. We don't need a law to tell us that that's a bad thing. And that's a key part. The Second Amendment's another issue. We finally have a Supreme Court that's actually weighing in on Second Amendment issues. For years, they dodged it. We're not going to hear it. We're not going to hear this. We're not going to hear that. And then you had things like the New York SAFE Act and all these other things that Massachusetts has done and Maryland has done to criminalize the law-abiding citizen. And it's all done under the guise of a greater good. As long as the average citizen continues to get suckered by the line that it's for the greater good, then our rights will continue to be infringed upon. And it's only going to get worse, because what you see the anti-gun crowd does, they'll come at you and ask for 100%, and then they settle for 5%. And the problem is that through the years, the pro-gun crowd has seen that as a compromise. So, well, we're giving them a little bit of this, or we're giving them a little bit of that. Well, here we are 50 years later, we've given up 40% of our rights. So, I mean, as you go down the line, the pro-gun stuff, we have to stop compromising. And I'm not Now, am I a believer that I can go into Harrisburg, or I can go to, if I were a national organization, go to DC and say, no compromise. We're coming at you and this is the way it's going to be. No, those folks that generally do that, in my opinion, tend to be frauds. There are a couple no compromise organizations out there, and I'm not going to throw any names around. One in particular is definitely a fraud group. They have 20 some gun rights organizations across the Midwest, and they do it just to raise money, and they cause a lot of grief for even the pro-gun politicians because it's about money. It's about getting contributions. There's another rather large pro-gun group out there that sticks on the no compromise line, but they compromise behind closed doors on several issues. And they'll tell you they don't because it's a fundraiser. Members don't want to hear compromise. The smart gun owner understands that what we have to do when we go into legislation like this, we have to, first of all, we have to get the sportsmen active. We have to get the gun owners active and get them to the polls, make sure they're voting. I don't want to hear any of this. Well, I can't make it to the poll. Then vote with an absentee ballot, vote with a mail-in ballot. Okay, whether you're opposed to them or not, the tools of my enemy are weapons that kill me. Right. So we need to still use that against them just as well. We need to get to the polls, and we need to win the House in Pennsylvania back. We need to win the legislators back onto the pro-gun side. So that's a big part of it. And second, we need to educate the moderate voter, the folks that don't feel like they have a vested interest in this, as to why, there was an interesting decision in court. A Judge Coffey issued this past week that stated, the Second Amendment is the only right that you lose when you cross a state line. Now, I thought that was a very interesting point, because if I drive into Maryland with an empty 30-round AR-15 magazine, I'm a felon. Mm-hmm. And then I drive back into Pennsylvania, where I just bought it at a gun show and perhaps in a Capitol building. I mean, you just don't, the laws change as you cross state line. It's the only right you have that gets amended as you cross a line on a map. And that's insane. It shouldn't be that way. So we need to win back not just the legislation. We need to get the House of Representatives back on our side here in PA. But we also need to make sure that we have the federal courts addressing these issues. Now, is there an easy way to do that? Absolutely not. You're still going to have the moderate American out there who's maybe not vested either way. I can't tell you how many interviews I've done where someone says, well, I have a handgun and I have a shotgun. I'm pro-Second Amendment. That's BS. If you think that's what makes you pro-Second Amendment, you don't understand the Second Amendment, period. And so that's become an issue. We need to educate folks. So the ENR SLO, it's Institute for Legal, Legislative, and Educational Action. We spent a lot of time out there doing concealed carry seminars where we discuss where your rights come from. We do them for free for a lot of the state representatives here that are on the Pro 2A side. And we're doing Sportsman's Club, trying to get the sportsmen more educated. You walk into a gun club and you say, the AR-15 is not a firearm. They look at you like you're nuts. But when you get into the legal definition of it here in Pennsylvania, now they understand why you're saying it. So it's about education and getting the moderate voter to understand that what they think is buying them safety is not safety, and it's absolutely not liberty.
Well, you brought up several very important points, and number one being that you have a propaganda machine that in the anti-gun movement, and really we have to create our own narrative, which also requires education. But in my opinion, we stick to the equalizer for women and protecting their children. How do you protect your home? It's not that we are aggressors. No, we are legal. We follow the law. We toe the law line. But it is just that right to defend. And that's where we're losing the argument, because it's not really that crystal clear. I mean, they may see us as toad shooting, boom, 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 like some cartoon, or we love to kill Bambi's mom. No, that's actually no. So we have to do more, I think, on that end for sure. And the other thing is the mail-in ballots. The reason why we're losing these elections is because when our founding fathers created the Constitution and the right election, which you're supposed to have an election determined in one day, you go to that voting site, you vote, it's done. At the end of the day, you know who won. Okay. We don't have that anymore right now. But what happened is you have one party, the anti-gun movement, who's working with them to make sure that the people who would never have voted are filling out a piece of paper in their living room and submitting it. So you have people who don't know issues. They will vote down party line and couldn't care less to know what the issues are. Those are not your best people who are voting. So then on the other side, you have the conservative movement, right, who says, I'm not going to fill that out. I'm going to be there on that day. Next thing you know, they got to go out of state or something because of a family situation, and they end up not voting. So we have to do better to educate and to say, listen, we may not like the way the game is set up, but every person's got to play. Am I right?
Correct. It's also a matter of being the responsible gun owner. We need to find the gun owners out there, the conservative thinkers, the pro 2A folks that are not voting, and educate them and get them there. If each of us, just in Pennsylvania alone, if every one of us that owned a firearm was able to motivate one person to get out and vote at the polls, assuming that 3/4 of them vote the same way we do, we would control who is governor, we would control who's in the House, and we would control who's president. It's that simple. It's a matter of, one thing that we battle when we go to a lot of these sportsmen's clubs is I piss off a lot of people, for lack of a better term, because I'll say things like, get off your butts and get out there. The idea that somebody else will do it is sinking the ship. If we don't all grab a bucket, the water's going to take us. So you've got to get everybody out there and get everybody engaged. And that's the hard part. It really is. If you can't get to the polls, then embrace the mail-in ballot. I would rather, I go to organizations and people say, oh, the vote's fixed and it's not worth it and all these other things. I would rather force their hand to say that you're going to have to fix it to overcome what we're bringing to you. Make it go that way. And then let's see what the end result is. But until you've got everybody active, how can you complain? So we need to get everybody out.
So let me ask you this, Jim. Okay, what advice would you give to the law-abiding citizens right now? How do they take control? Outside of just voting, are there organizations like yours that they should be joining? Should they be becoming more organized and attending meetings to learn what's going on? Because I guarantee you, legislation is like the 109th thing that most people, average people, worry about. But it should be like close to number one outside of your family, right?
Sure. It's tough. Now, here in Pennsylvania, we're the Second Amendment group. I mean, there are bigger groups out there. There's no argument that there's more money out there than we have. But in Pennsylvania, Firearms Against Crime, ILEA, we're the lobbying group in PA. If you want something done, it goes through us. So we know that. The Second Amendment caucus in Harrisburg knows that. The senators and representatives I speak to weekly know that. So the influence is coming through us. And I know it sometimes burns other organizations that I say that, but it's the fact of it. And one thing that we do for our members, that we try to make sure people are engaged every day when the bills come out of Harrisburg, proposed or otherwise, we review them, we grade them, and if they're gun related, we send them out for our members to know. We do monthly meetings for education. We do seminars. Starting September 13th, we start a band of 12 seminars before the end of November. So we're all over the place. And like I said, we've teamed up with everybody. We're trying to get the education out there. We're trying to get folks engaged. Our website is a great resource for the white papers that we write. If you like to debate why armor-piercing ammunition should not be outlawed, or what even armor-piercing ammunition is. If you like to debate red flag laws or firearms on school property, we have position papers on that explain the law. And that's an extremely misunderstood law, where even a lot of the district attorneys sometimes need corrected on what the law actually says and what it doesn't say as far as firearms on school property. So there's a lot out there to learn.
So, Jim, tell us, please, how do we become a member? How do we get involved in your organization? The
easiest way is to go to our website. So it's www.foac-illea.org. And I think our second tab up there is about membership and how to sign up. We do trial memberships for folks that want to see what we're about. We do 1, 3, whatever it takes. The easiest way is to get involved on the website. We do have events out there. We have gun bashes. We do the Second Amendment rally. We do the educational seminars. So if folks want to get engaged, you pick the level. How engaged do you want to be? And you come tell me. That's how it's going to go. The good news is also you guys are going to be at the Radivine Freedom Festival. Absolutely. And that's huge, because we're looking to have about 10,000 people there. So get your information. Make sure you go there. Speak to Jim. Speak to his representatives. Make sure you get involved, folks out there. And
So don't forget, go to the website, www.foac, -il, is it dash or dot? Dash. Okay. -ILLEA.org. Make a difference. Don't just sit around wondering how things happened. And by the way, you have high regards and, from Patty Coombs and Bob Roach, who are good friends of mine, and we're involved in the sanctuary movement as well. You know, there's a lot of pockets of things going on. And really, it's just a matter of communication and networking among all the organizations laterally, right?
Yes, ma'am.
To get it done. I'd like to see personally more of that, because I think we need it. You know, we can't be reinventing the wheel all the time and feeling isolated. You know, use the niches, get involved. But certainly, we respect all you do, Jim, and the history of what your organization's been doing. You walk the walk. Please make sure to look at the white papers, make sure to get involved in the debates, folks, and make sure to be, we need to become a little bit more proactive. We're always reactive. The attack, how do we deal with this? You know, it's like we're playing the victim every time. And meanwhile, we control the guns. You know,
join us and fight back. That's the best way to put
exactly.
it.
And we're peaceful people. You don't want to see us fight. We don't want to. That's
but
what
the fight's here.
Yes.
The fight is here. So we either take it up now or we surrender it.
And you know what? There might not be a fight anymore for our kids or our grandchildren if we don't.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Jen, for your time. We look forward to hearing you again and seeing you again and wishing you the best, because we need you to win for all of us, and we need to get involved to make sure that happens.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. We'll see you in October.
Absolutely. Take care.